The protagonist, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, feels emotionally neglected in her marriage. Her husband, once attentive and warm, has become distant, preoccupied with work and oblivious to her growing loneliness. In this emotional void, Sarah begins to develop an unintentional attachment to her best friend's son, Ethan, who often comes over to help with household tasks. One evening, while Sarah is cleaning up after dinner, Ethan stays behind to help. As they chat, their conversation delves into more personal subjects and a comforting friendship forms. Over time, they share more than just surface-level discussions, bonding over their individual struggles and frustrations. Ethan's gestures, holding her hand a bit longer than usual or brushing against her as they work side by side, spark a hidden thrill in Sarah, though she tries to brush it off as mere affection. One evening, while her husband is away on a work trip, Ethan stops by to help with some household repairs. Sarah is finishing up in the bathroom when she feels Ethan's hand gently guiding her out of the tub where she'd been scrubbing. The innocent moment lingers a bit too long, leading them to a point of no return. Sarah's life had always been built around well-defined boundaries, the kind that made her feel safe and predictable. She was a loving wife, a caring friend, and a supportive mother. Her life revolved around her family, her husband's needs, and the daily routines that stitched her world together. But as the years went on, she began to notice a slow, unspoken drift in her marriage. Her husband, David, was no longer the man she had married 2 decades ago. The warmth, laughter, and shared moments that once defined their relationship had gradually faded, replaced by a silent attachment. David's career had taken precedence, and as his responsibilities grew, so did the distance between them. Conversations that once flowed freely now felt forced, confined to superficial topics and schedules. It was as though they were living separate lives under the same roof, each bound by their own invisible walls. Amid this emptiness, Sarah found herself yearning for companionship, for someone who would notice her, listen to her, and share in her day-to-day struggles. That was when Ethan, her best friend Laura's son, began to visit more frequently. At 25, Ethan was charming, intelligent, and kind-hearted, with a sense of humor that reminded Sarah of her younger self. He would come over to help with chores around the house, always eager to lend a hand whenever she needed it. His youthful energy and attentive nature filled a void she hadn't realized was there. The moments they spent together felt innocent at first, mere extensions of a long-standing friendship between their families. But as the weeks passed, Sarah noticed herself lingering in Ethan's presence, savoring their conversations a bit too much. There was something magnetic about Ethan, a natural ease that made Sarah feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. She caught herself laughing more around him, feeling lighter, freer. She would blush at his casual compliments, feeling an unexpected thrill whenever he offered a playful remark or flashed a charming smile. A simple touch on her shoulder, a brush of their hands as they passed items back and forth while cooking or cleaning, it was all so subtle, yet it awakened something in her, a longing she thought she had buried long ago. She would feel a rush of excitement, like a teenager again, wondering if he noticed the same energy sparking between them. She knew it was wrong, that Ethan was young enough to be her own child, yet she couldn't ignore the small moments that made her feel desired and cherished. One afternoon, Ethan arrived unexpectedly, offering to help clean the house while David was away on a business trip. Sarah hesitated, feeling an inexplicable tension in the air as she invited him in. They began cleaning side by side, sharing stories and memories, laughing like old friends. But there was something different this time. As they worked, she found herself stealing glances at him, noticing the small details of his face, the way he moved, his gentle touch when he reached past her. She was aware of every brush of his hand, every moment they shared in close proximity. She felt her heart beat faster, her pulse quickening whenever their hands would accidentally meet. Ethan seemed to sense her attention, lingering in his glances, reciprocating her laughter with a quiet intensity. The line between friendship and something deeper began to blur, leaving Sarah in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She felt guilty, ashamed, but at the same time, thrilled, alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. There was a forbidden allure in the connection she shared with Ethan, a spark that defied the years between them. She would catch herself waiting for the next accidental touch, the next shared laugh, wondering if he could see through her facade, if he knew the effect he had on her. She questioned her own motives, wondering if she was reading too much into simple gestures, or if he too felt the silent electricity that crackled between them. With each passing encounter, Sarah's resolve weakened, her boundaries beginning to fray. She started to look forward to Ethan's visits, planning her day around the possibility of seeing him, feeling a guilty thrill each time she saw his name pop up on her phone. She would dress a little nicer, wear her hair differently, pretending it was just for herself but knowing deep down it was for him. She was drawn to him, to the warmth and attention he provided, and as much as she tried to convince herself it was harmless, she knew the line they were treading was dangerous. Each time he laughed, each time he offered her a small, meaningful compliment, she felt herself falling further, caught in a web of emotions she couldn't control. Ethan, on his part, seemed oblivious to the turmoil he had stirred in her. He treated her with respect, always kind and attentive, but she wondered if he sensed the growing intensity between them. She caught him staring a few times, his eyes holding hers a second too long, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. It was subtle, nothing that could be called out, yet enough to leave her heart racing, her thoughts spinning long after he left. The more time they spent together, the deeper she sank into her feelings, torn between her loyalty to her husband and the yearning that consumed her. It was a forbidden attraction, one that left her feeling both guilty and exhilarated, caught between the life she had known and the life she secretly longed for. As the months wore on, Sarah couldn't ignore the widening gulf in her marriage. David, her husband, had always been a man of ambition, driven and single-minded in his pursuit of success. When they were younger, she had admired his passion and dedication, and he had been attentive, bringing her small gifts and surprising her with spontaneous dates. But with time, his work became his main priority, demanding more of him than ever. He worked late nights, went on frequent business trips, and when he was home, he was glued to his laptop, his attention elsewhere, even if they were in the same room. They spoke less, their conversations stunted by exhaustion and routine, reduced to logistical exchanges about bills, children, or household tasks. Sarah tried to reach out, gently expressing her feelings, hoping he would recognize her growing loneliness. She would initiate conversations, try to engage him in the way she once could, but David always seemed distracted, brushing off her attempts with a nod or a quick comment before returning to his work. He rarely looked up when she spoke, his responses increasingly indifferent, as though her words were just background noise. There were no more moments of intimacy or closeness, just a dull silence that settled between them. The bedroom, once a space of shared affection and warmth, had become a place of isolation. They lay beside each other, yet miles apart, their backs turned, each absorbed in their own world. Sarah felt invisible, a mere shadow in her own home, yearning for the emotional connection that once filled her life. The more David withdrew, the more Sarah began to question herself. She wondered if she had done something wrong, if she had changed in ways that made her less desirable or worthy of his attention. Her self-esteem took a hit, leaving her feeling unattractive, unwanted, and unappreciated. She would catch herself looking in the mirror, scrutinizing her reflection, searching for signs of aging, flaws she had overlooked. She found herself wondering if David was disinterested because she had lost something, some spark or allure that had once drawn him to her. She began to dress up for him, to make small changes in her appearance, hoping he would notice. But he didn't. The pain of feeling unseen and unloved sank deep within her, festering and growing each day. Her friends noticed her unhappiness, their concern evident in gentle questions and concerned glances. But Sarah found it hard to open up, to admit the emptiness she felt, even to those closest to her. She didn't want to seem ungrateful or appear as though she was undermining her husband's hard work. David was respected by everyone, admired for his dedication and success, and she felt guilty for wanting more from him, for desiring something beyond what he could provide. In social settings, she would smile, put on a brave face, and laugh along, pretending her life was as perfect as it appeared on the surface. But inside, the loneliness gnawed at her, a constant ache that only grew stronger. It was during one of these difficult stretches that Ethan started visiting more frequently. At first, Sarah viewed him merely as her friend's son, a polite young man who helped her with household tasks. But as their conversations grew deeper, she began to see him as more than that. Ethan had a way of listening, of giving his full attention, a quality she desperately missed. He would ask about her day, genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings, and he would offer advice, comforting her in ways she hadn't felt in years. He noticed the small things, her frustrations, her struggles, the minor details she felt nobody else cared about. In Ethan's presence, Sarah felt valued and understood. Unlike David, who often brushed her off, Ethan would engage her in thoughtful conversations, making her feel as though her words mattered. Their connection was more than just casual interaction, it was a respite from the emptiness of her marriage, a reprieve from the feeling of being overlooked. He saw her not just as someone's wife or someone's mother, but as a person with thoughts, dreams, and desires. She found herself sharing stories from her past, anecdotes she hadn't thought about in years, laughing freely in his company. There was a lightness she felt with him, a release from the weight of loneliness and self-doubt that had plagued her. Sarah became increasingly aware of her growing attachment to Ethan. She would think about him even when he wasn't around, recalling their conversations, the way he smiled, the way he made her feel seen. She began to anticipate his visits, a flutter of excitement sparking within her whenever she knew he would be stopping by. She started to wonder if he noticed her loneliness, if he understood how much his presence meant to her. Their bond felt safe at first, a balm for her emotional wounds, but she sensed the fine line they were treading, the unspoken tension building between them. The loneliness in her marriage only intensified her connection with Ethan, feeding the emotional attachment that had begun to grow. It wasn't about physical attraction, at least not initially. It was about the deep need she had to be acknowledged, to feel loved, to feel wanted. Her longing for attention, for someone to truly see her, became all-consuming, blurring her judgment and clouding her mind with thoughts she knew she should resist. Every time she was with Ethan, she felt a profound sense of relief, a release from the emotional isolation that had held her captive. It was as though he offered her a glimpse of the life she had once dreamed of, a life filled with connection, laughter, and genuine companionship. Amid these feelings, a persistent guilt gnawed at her. She knew her attachment to Ethan was dangerous, that it threatened to complicate everything. She questioned her own emotions, wondering if she was overstepping boundaries, creating a fantasy out of desperation. But the more she tried to rationalize her feelings, the more she found herself caught in them, unable to sever the bond that had developed. The emotional drift from David had left her vulnerable, susceptible to the kindness and understanding Ethan provided, and though she knew she was walking a precarious path, she couldn't bring herself to let go. Over time, the encounters between Sarah and Ethan took on a life of their own, filled with secrets and charged moments that lingered just beneath the surface. The tension between them grew, hidden in the corners of her home, in the quiet spaces of her day where she'd find herself thinking about him. Their interactions began to feel like something private, something just between the two of them. It was an invisible thread connecting them, one that Sarah both feared and relished. She knew there was a line they were dancing around, but the thrill of being close to it yet not crossing it was intoxicating. Ethan's visits became more frequent, and Sarah found herself anticipating them with a mixture of excitement and guilt. They'd often spend afternoons together, sharing tasks around the house or cooking in the kitchen. The air between them was filled with unspoken words, glances that held longer than necessary, small touches that lingered just a moment too long. These encounters, though seemingly innocent, felt deeply intimate, like small treasures Sarah tucked away to relive in the quiet of the night. She found herself looking forward to each visit with a heightened sense of anticipation, dressing a little nicer, fussing with her hair more than usual, feeling a familiar nervousness she hadn't felt in years. One evening, as the sun began to dip and bathe the kitchen in a warm glow, Ethan stayed behind after helping her clean up from a small family gathering. David was out of town, and Sarah's children were busy with their own lives, leaving the two of them alone in a house that suddenly felt too intimate, too quiet. As they worked, their hands brushed while reaching for a dish, and they both paused, the air thick with an unspoken question. Sarah felt her heart race, her face flushing as she realized how close they were standing. The familiar rush of emotions hit her, and she felt torn between wanting to pull back and yet longing to stay in the moment, to let herself feel this connection just a little longer. Ethan didn't move away. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a softness that made her pulse quicken. The simplicity of the moment, the two of them alone in her kitchen, the rest of the world falling away, felt dangerously intimate. Sarah could feel the walls she had built over the years beginning to crumble, her resolve weakening with every second that passed. She knew she should step back, make a joke, diffuse the tension, but she found herself frozen, caught in the gaze of someone who saw her in a way she hadn't been seen in so long. As they continued their small, hidden encounters, Sarah began to notice the impact it had on her. Her days felt brighter, filled with an energy she hadn't felt in years. She was more attentive to her appearance, choosing her outfits carefully, putting on her favorite perfume, her steps lighter and quicker. It was as though she were living in two worlds, the one where she was a wife and mother, dedicated and dependable, and the secret world she shared with Ethan, a world filled with possibility, excitement, and risk. She felt alive. A part of her reawakened after lying dormant for so long, and she didn't want to give it up. Ethan, too, seemed to feel the pull of their hidden connection. He began to send her brief texts, simple messages about his day or a joke he thought she'd enjoy. They weren't overtly flirtatious, but Sarah could read between the lines, sensing the shared understanding that made each message feel like a secret, a code meant only for her. When they spoke, there was a playfulness in his tone, a warmth that made her feel special, chosen. She would find herself smiling at her phone, her heart fluttering at each notification, savoring the feeling of being wanted. One evening, as Sarah was preparing to clean the guest bathroom, Ethan offered to help, following her upstairs with a mop and a bucket. They worked side by side in silence, but the proximity between them was palpable, an energy that hummed in the air, begging for release. As she leaned over the tub to scrub a stubborn stain, she felt Ethan's hand graze her back, his fingers lingering slightly longer than necessary. She froze, the warmth of his hand sending a jolt through her. She was acutely aware of every movement, every breath. As he stood close behind her, his presence overwhelming, his touch igniting a rush of emotions she couldn't ignore. In that moment, everything else faded away, the years of loyalty, the boundaries she had once clung to. It was just the two of them, in a space that felt charged with a longing they had both kept hidden. Sarah's mind raced with questions, with a deep internal struggle, but the pull of the moment was too strong to resist. She wanted to lose herself in it, to let go of everything holding her back, if only for a few seconds. She was painfully aware of how close they were to crossing a line that once crossed could never be undone. Yet the allure of stepping over that boundary, of surrendering to a feeling that had consumed her for so long, was irresistible. The days following this encounter left Sarah in a haze, her emotions tangled in knots. The secrecy, the subtle glances, and the unspoken understanding between her and Ethan created a connection she couldn't shake, even though she knew it was dangerous. She found herself replaying their moments together, the accidental touches, the lingering gazes, savoring each detail as though they were pieces of a story she was writing in her mind. The thrill of their hidden encounters was both exhilarating and terrifying, filling her with a mix of guilt and longing that left her constantly on edge. Each new encounter with Ethan became another hidden chapter in a story she was both terrified and thrilled to continue. She knew she was playing with fire, that her emotions were spiraling into a dangerous territory that could shatter everything she had built. Yet, the pull was undeniable, a forbidden allure that she couldn't escape. In Ethan's presence, she felt free, alive, and cherished in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was a secret life she had fallen into, one she knew could never last, but one she couldn't bear to let go of. The emotional conflict that Sarah felt as her attachment to Ethan deepened became a constant, overwhelming presence in her life. Each day, as she went through the motions of her routines, she was bombarded with competing emotions: guilt, desire, fear, and confusion. On the one hand, she felt a deep sense of betrayal toward her marriage, as though she were unfaithful not just to her husband, David, but to herself, her own values, and the life they had built together. On the other hand, there was the undeniable pull of something raw and real, something that made her feel seen, desired, and alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The joy she found in her interactions with Ethan was a balm for wounds she had long ignored, yet it was also a powerful reminder of how far she had drifted from the person she once was, the person she used to be with David. The guilt was relentless, creeping up on her in the quiet moments, in the spaces where she found herself alone with her thoughts. As she sat at the kitchen table, sipping her morning coffee, she couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep up the facade. How much longer could she live with this secret? This connection to Ethan that was growing stronger with each passing day. She'd catch herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her face a mask of sorrow and longing, and think about the life she had with David. It wasn't a bad life, she knew that. David provided for the family, kept them comfortable, and was dependable in every sense of the word. He had never been cruel or unkind, he simply hadn't been present, emotionally, for a long time. Yet every time she allowed herself to reflect on their marriage, the painful reality sank in that they had drifted so far apart that she barely recognized the woman who had once fallen in love with him. The emotional isolation she felt in her marriage was the root of her growing attachment to Ethan. When he listened to her, when he looked at her with that quiet intensity, she felt something stir inside her that had long been dormant. He was a mirror to the woman she once was, the woman who still had dreams, desires, and passions. She remembered feeling this alive when she and David first started their life together. But somewhere along the way, that connection had vanished, replaced by a partnership based on routine and responsibility. Ethan, with his youth, energy, and fresh perspective, made her feel as though she mattered again, that she was more than just a wife and mother. In his presence, she felt heard, she felt important, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. But the more she became attached to Ethan, the more the walls of her guilt closed in on her. She would catch herself planning her days around when he would come over, rearranging tasks and responsibilities just to steal a few more moments in his company. Each time he reached out to her, whether with a smile or a gentle touch, she felt her resolve weaken. She knew it wasn't right, but she also knew she wasn't ready to let go of the feeling he gave her, the feeling of being wanted, desired, and valued. It was a hunger she had buried for so long, and now that it had been awakened, it was impossible to ignore. Her nights became the hardest to bear. She would lie awake next to David, unable to sleep as the weight of her emotions pressed down on her. She had always been able to share her thoughts, her desires, and her dreams with him. But now, there was nothing left to say. Their conversations had become so empty, their shared moments so hollow, that Sarah found herself wishing for something more. She would look at David, lying there beside her, and wonder what had happened to them. Was he even aware of the emotional void between them? Did he feel the same way? Or was he too lost in his own world to even notice? The thought filled her with a deep sense of sorrow and regret. She had loved him, once with all her heart. But now, the love she had for him felt strained, a shadow of what it used to be. As Sarah's attachment to Ethan grew, she found herself torn between the man she had committed her life to and the man who had awakened something deep inside her. She didn't want to hurt David, she didn't want to destroy her family. Yet every time she saw Ethan, every time they shared a conversation, a touch, she felt herself sinking deeper into a conflict that seemed impossible to resolve. She felt trapped, suffocated by her own emotions. Her loyalty to David fought against the yearning for something more, something real, that she had found in Ethan. And the shame she felt from betraying her marriage only made the emotional struggle more excruciating.